So you want to know if this thing's any good. And it's the best thrower that I have in my entire collection. It's about 31% brighter at the hotspot than the Convoy L6, which is a great thrower. So if you're looking for a good thrower, this is one of the best lights you can get. It has a very good user interface, and you can access turbo easily and then turn it off with a long press on and off. If you want to access moonlight, you can easily quick press that and it goes to moonlight, long press, turn it off. So you can always access moonlight or turbo if you need. It has a 2-minute turbo timer, so for normal users it won't get too hot. And if you're a power user, you can bypass that and then leave it running as long as you want. So it's versatile like that. The built-in micro USB charge port is very good and pulls 1.8 amps. So you can charge up your 5000 milliamp hour battery in about 3 hours, no problem. It doesn't come with batteries, but if you throw in the little Cala 5000 milliamp hour battery, it'll have plenty of runtime and a lot of power. This is a cheap battery, but very high quality, and you can get it from most sources like AliExpress and stuff. It does, however, come with a 18650 to 26650 adapter, so you can use your 18650s if you don't own any 26650s. And then you can use this flashlight as a battery charger for both of those types of batteries. So that's a good feature. Now for a couple items I don't like about this light, and that's that the charge port leaks water if you submerge it, and then the water will get in there and damage your driver. So I'd say this is only good for exposure to light rain, but that's about it. Another bad thing is when it's being charged, you can only go to moonlight mode, and that's pretty annoying because you might want to use it on turbo, but they don't allow you to do that. But that's better than nothing, so we'll take what we can get. It doesn't have a tripod mount on the back end, which would have been nice, but I guess you can't ask for everything. This hotspot's so bright, even is bright compared to direct sunlight. Look at that. Overall, this is a great thrower because of the top of the line smooth quality built reflector here. There's a full list of features and it's definitely worth every penny. So now let's take this thing inside. So these are all the items that we're going to go into in detail in the video, but I'm going to give you a quick briefing on these so you know the gist of it. Obviously this thing's a great thrower, as you can see here. You can expect it to charge at 1.82 amps. And here's the user interface. You can pause it here if you want to take a closer look at it. I'll demonstrate how it works later if you want to take a look. Here's all the parts laid out on a table. It's very high quality. And if you're looking for a good thrower with a great reflector, this definitely has that. For those interested in the quality of the threads, they're very high quality. The rear threads are on the left and the front threads are kind of angle cut. The driver's made by Manker and is very high quality. You can see all those little tiny pass-through holes. That reduces the resistance and makes it a very high-powered flashlight, very efficient. It uses the XHP35 and it sits on a 27mm copper MCPCB board. Here are the runtimes. You can pause it if you want to take a look, but basically it can go 455 hours on the lowest setting. Only the Zanflare F1 can run a lot longer. The quality of light it produces is very good. I give it an A+, and its flicker index is 0.0. Its percent flicker is very low at 3%. As I said before, this is a great thrower, and it can hit this tower 500 meters away no problem. It's all thanks to its 3.5 degree beam angle, and if you look at this red curve, it peaks right in the middle. Here's a closer look at that beam intensity profile, and you can see it's well over 14,000 lux at 2.3 meters. Those lux are measured using a light meter, so anybody at home can use a light meter and measure it at 2.3 meters, and you can test out all your flashlights and compare it to all the graphs I put up here. I got mine from a seller on AliExpress, and I'll put a link in the description to the one I purchased. Here's the graph with all the rest of the lights I have, and as you can see, nothing throws harder than the UT02. The Convoy L6 comes close, and it has a much bigger beam angle, but its max intensity isn't there. So this is like a laser beam of a flashlight. If you're into throwers, this is definitely the best one. Here's the intensity on a logarithmic scale, so you can see more of the peripheral angles. And as you can see, the L6 throws a lot of light out to the sides. It's much more useful. The UT02 has very poor peripheral angle, and it's just basically a thrower. You can see the red line is basically below the 50% top. I'll put links to all these graphs in the description, so you can check them out in closer detail. Here's a quick comparison of the intensity at 2.3 meters. And here you can see the UT02 and the L6 are at the top, and it's noteworthy to say that the C8 is a pretty great thrower too. Here's a quick description of how I measured the beam angle, field angle, and peripheral angle. So the beam angle is where it drops off to 50%, field angle is where it drops off to 10%, and the peripheral angle is kind of where it just drops off. To quickly compare all the angles, I plotted them here, and obviously the UT02 is the best thrower at 3.5 degrees, and the DQG 26650 has the highest field angle, so if you're looking for a walking light, that one definitely fits the bill. It floods out way to your left and right so you can see as well as in the day basically. It does that because it has a diffuser in the front lens. Here's some pictures taken with my camera, fixed settings so that they're all comparable. And here's what it looks like with no flashlight on. Here's what it looks like with the UT02, definitely a thrower. Keep an eye on that green door across the field. You'll see that all the other non-throwers will not be able to light that up. With the M3 you can't even light up that door, and if someone's standing over there you're not going to be able to see them. So it's a great general light, but that's about it. It's not a thrower. Convoy S2 Plus is exactly the same as the M3, same type of distribution and output levels. And then the Xanflare F1 has a smooth reflector, so it kind of lights up that green door. So it's a mix between a thrower and a S2 Plus. It's a pretty bright light though. And the C8 is about 50% the intensity, and is a pretty good thrower and lights up that door quite well. So it's more of a mid-sized thrower, whereas the UT02 is a large thrower with a huge head, and it lights up that door no problem with this much larger reflector. DQG3, the tiny 26650, it's not much of a thrower, but it has a lot of light, so it kind of lights up that door. But what this is good for is lighting up the entire field. This is a very impressive small compact flashlight and puts out like 3000 lumens at least. This is the best hand cannon I've got. Fits in the palm of your hand, but still lights up that entire field. It's pretty impressive. It's equal to the Skyray King, which is a much larger light and uses 4 18650s. So they're basically putting out the same amount of light. But you can fit the tiny 26650 in your pocket, whereas the Skyray King you need a bag. But they're not throwers like the UT02. And then here's the Convoy L6, which demolishes all the other flashlights in peripheral and in throw at the same time. It's a very large light, multi-celled, uses the XHP 70 LED, pushes out 3800 lumens, has a huge reflector, and is definitely the beast of all lights that I have. But still, the intensity of the beam is not as great as the UT02. But the UT02 is much more restrictive, and you can only see where its beam is illuminating. The L6 is just a huge searchlight. This is more of a spotlight. And then we've got the UT01, which is similar to the M3, but about 200 less lumens. It's also a little more narrow, so it's easier to carry, and is a great everyday carry. And then back to our control picture, where there's no flashlight at all. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of what the lights can do and how they compare to each other. So it's all thanks to the XHP 35 high intensity LED, which is already de-domed, throws all that light out into that large smooth reflector and straight down that 3.5 degree beam. I have option 2, the 5000 Kelvin, but you can also get the 6500 Kelvin, which I think is going to put out a little more lumens than the 5000, but it's going to look a little more bluish. The Xanflare F1 is a little bit brighter than it, but the UT02 is pretty damn good at second place. It beats all the other single-celled lights I have. It's not a lightweight flashlight because it's got thick aluminum and it's got that 26650 in there, and it's actually double the weight of the Convoy C8 at 397 grams. C8's only 192 grams. It's about half the weight of the L6, so it's a heavy flashlight for its size. It's kind of bulky. But if you want a thrower, that's the price you pay. So there's 3 pages with review details, so you can take a look. Show the first one, second one, and third one here. The second one, you can pause it and take a look, but we're going to go through all these things in detail later, and here's the third one. So keep watching this video if you want to look at all those things in detail. So now we're going to take a deeper look at all these other review items. Let's open up the box and see what it comes with. The retail packaging looks very good. It's very high quality, so if you got to give this away as a gift, it works very well. It's got nice 360 foam padding all around it, so it'll keep it nice and safe during shipping. Comes with a user manual, micro USB cable, lanyard, and the cable's nice and short, so it won't take up too much space in your bag if you have to carry it with you. And then 1 spare O-ring. Oh, and they're nice enough to include an 18650 to 26650 adapter, so I don't have to use these little crappy ones. So that's a nice little touch for them to throw that in. It does cost you a couple bucks if you order it separately. But obviously you should be using a 26650 with this flashlight, like this 5000 milliamp hour little Cala. You can get these from GearBest or AliExpress. This thing is a pretty hefty flashlight. I like the fit and finish. It's nice and smooth. It doesn't have the aggressive machining like the Convoys do, where this is kind of sharp and it will scratch stuff if you hit it. These are all kind of nicely rounded. The machining of the uTorch is actually a lot better because they chamfered a lot of the corners, so you don't have those 90-degree edges that are going to be abrasive and scratch everything. So let's take a look at all the review items. I've created this summary table. All the findings of those review topics are listed in this table, and we'll go through the table item by item. First item is the LED. The uTorch 02 uses a really good LED, and that's the Cree XHP 35. It's one of the newer Cree LEDs, and it has very high efficacy. The only problem is it runs at 12 volts. A single lithium-ion cell only produces 4.2 volts. So the UT02 has a built-in boost driver, and that kicks it up over 12 volts. So there's not much you can do to that boost driver. It's developed the way it is, and it can only put out as much power as it puts out. They don't have a 6 volt, and they don't even have a 3 volt. It's because it's basically 4 LED dies built into one. And that's how it gets the extra output, but that's why the voltage is so high too. The XHP 35 comes in the de-domed version and the domed version. They've used the high intensity version in this, and that makes it throw a lot better because it's throwing a lot of the light out the sides into that large reflector and straight down the middle, so you get a nice tight strong beam. If they use the domed version, more of that light would go out the front and just go flooding out there. So they chose the right LED for this application, and it makes a great thrower. The color temperature that I chose is 5000 Kelvin, and that's a nice neutral white. I don't like the super cool whites because I don't think it produces a very quality light. Higher color temperatures have a higher output, but they don't have as much red in the spectrum, so the quality is great. That's why the lower color temperatures usually cost you a little more, because they have more phosphors in them. So the 5000 has a 3D code, and what that is the chromaticity region. And I'll quickly tell you what that is. So here you see it's 3D under the chromaticity region. They actually haven't given us a number for the minimum luminous flux. And of course, if you have the highest luminous flux, that means you have the brightest LED. So the D4 group is the best one, but they don't tell you it's the D4 or the C4. So you're not really sure how much this puts out. So knowing that it's a 3D, you find 5000 and it's right there along the curve. So it's a pretty neutral tint. So in this chromaticity chart, you can see that if you're below the line, you're more pink or red. And if you're above the line, then you're more yellow and green. So being 3D, it's right in the middle and a balance of everything. So it sits about right here. If you want a warmer light, then usually you try to get down below the curve. And I like warm color temperatures, so I'll pick 2700. And then I'll pick a chromaticity bin that's in the red or pinkish area. I don't really like yellow light, so I try to stay away from the bins that are above that black line. And that black line represents something that's neutral or a black body radiator. Chromaticity is kind of a way of measuring the quality of light. So if you prefer warmer lights that are more reddish, then go with chromaticity bins that are below that black body line. I don't know why you'd want light from the yellowish area, but if you don't know what you're doing, you might accidentally buy something in that region. Make sure you buy the right chromaticity. So this chart shows you what I was talking about. The 3000 Kelvin light puts out a lot more red light, or light that's at around 580 to 630 nanometers. As you can see, 6000 color temperature doesn't produce much red light, but it produces a lot of blue light, or narrower light. So the quality of the light isn't as good, and the CRI isn't as great, so its color reproduction won't be as great. So back to the efficacy, that's lumens per watt. This number tells us how much light an LED produces for the amount of watts you put into it. So obviously you want the highest lumens per watt. So when you're buying a replacement LED, try to get something that's D4 or higher. This graph here says at 100% or 550 lumens for the D4 group, you're using up 350 milliamps. So if you're pushing 1050 milliamps, you're 240% of that. So the higher the initial luminous flux, the higher your output's going to be on the top end. Here's the graph showing your forward voltage, and as your forward current goes up, your forward voltage increases. So it gets harder to push the LED even harder. So for a good LED, you want a very good forward voltage. So if you calculate how much power that's running at 350 milliamps, you can determine that it's pushing 139 lumens per watt. So that's a very good LED and very efficient. Anything above 100 lumens per watt is really good. When you're pushing max current, you times that by 240%, and we get 1340 lumens. So at the maximum current, I figure it's about 13.125 watts. And if you're pushing 1340 lumens, then about 101.1 lumens per watt, which is pretty good. So the reason I went into all that is because its rated lumens is 1300 lumens, which might be a little bit on the high side. Let's take a look at the luxometer. And so I've plotted all the lights on this bar chart, and you can see the UT02 sits at second place for all the single-celled lights. It's only bested by the Zanflare F1, which uses the V6 XPL in there. So that's the highest bin of the XPLs, and you can see why having the highest efficacy bin makes the light a lot brighter. That's how they achieve 191. And of course all these other multi-LED, multi-celled flashlights are putting out a lot more light, using up a lot more power. So if we take a closer look at just the single-celled, single LED flashlights, you can see how high the UT02 sits on that graph. And keep in mind that the Zanflare doesn't use a dedomed version, so that light is actually getting directly pushed out the front with that dome. That's why it has less losses, and that's why it rates a little higher on this chart. The UT02 has a large reflector, and that large reflector has some losses when the light bounces off its reflective surface. So that's where you're losing some of your efficiency. But the Zanflare isn't a thrower, so the UT02 is giving up some efficiency to increase its ability to throw. And we'll see that in the next couple tests. So the maximum power of a flashlight tells us how much lumens it can produce, because lumens is based on lumens per watt. So the more watts you can put in, the more lumens you can get out. As you can see, the Zanflare F1 is at 14 watts, and that's why I can easily push out more light. The UT02 has that boost driver, and it can only pull 2.4 amps, and that's about 10.1 watts. So it's not going to deliver any more wattage to that LED than you actually put into it. That's why the max wattage is a good figure to look at when trying to determine how bright a light can be. So the 1340 rated lumens is actually just theoretical. I don't really see it pushing out that much, 2.4 amps. And that's why you got to check that wattage. This flashlight has a very good runtime, 455 hours or 19 days, because it has a very low mode. Not as good as the F1, which go like 60 days, but this is still pretty low moonlight mode. And the parasitic drain or the standby current is very, very low. It's 0.00 milliamps. So theoretically, it'll take 71 years to get all that energy in the battery. On turbo, this thing can last 2 hours. But keep in mind it has a 2-minute turbo timer in the first group mode, so you gotta go to strobe and access that turbo mode. It will get hot enough to burn your hand, so make sure you don't keep it on turbo unless you know what you're doing. The UT02 has the second best runtime out of all my flashlights. The king of it is the F1. The built-in USB charger pulls about 1.8 amps or 9.4 watts, so it took about 3 hours and 40 minutes to fully charge a 5000 milliamp hour battery after it was fully drained in the flashlight. The UT02 has the highest maximum beam intensity, and that's where it shows off its throwing abilities. It is the brightest hotspot out of all the flashlights I have. At 2.3 meters, this thing can light up the wall to 14,300 lumens. The L6 can only do to 10,880, so nothing can come close to the UT02's throwing ability. It towers over the rest. The UT02 is a great thrower because it has the smallest beam angle out of all the lights I have at 3.5 degrees. The C8 comes close at 4 degrees, but it doesn't control the light as well as the UT02. So I determine the beam angle by measuring where it drops to 50% of the max luminous intensity. So if it was getting like 14,000 lumens in the middle, when it gets to 7,000 lumens, that's where you mark it, and then you measure that beam angle. And then for the field angle, I measured out to where it drops at 10%. So 10% of 14,000 is 1,400. So when it drops to 1,400, that's where I mark the field angle. And then the peripheral angle is where it really drops off. So as you can see, the UT02 has this ring around the outside, and that's the peripheral. So if it doesn't have that ring and it just keeps lighting out to 90 degrees, we'll say that the beam angle is 180 degrees. Some lights actually almost have that because it has a diffuser type material on the front. So if you want a lot of peripheral angle light, then make sure you get something that throws a lot of light out the side. Otherwise you're going to have this circle that's right in front of you, like the UT02. So here's the beam angle, which is around 3.5 degrees. The field angle, which is 19 degrees, and the peripheral angle is around 60. So that's how I determined the angle. And then I plotted out all the angles so you can see how it compares to the rest. And I organized them with the smallest beam angle on the left to the largest beam angle on the right. So generally speaking, the throwers are on the left and the flutters are on the right side. I didn't choose to use candela because it's kind of a weird number. You have to go through a calculator to determine how much candela it is. So I'm not going to bother using candela, but it's just something good to know. And if I calculated 14,300 lux at 2.3 meters, then it's about 75,000 candela. They actually rate the light at 124,000 candela, but my measurement methods might be a little off. So what I did was take the lux readings at all these different points, out to about 180 degrees, and then I plotted it on a graph for all these different lights. So as you can see here, it illuminates the center very well and then drops off quickly to the outsides. So here's a diagram of all the points I measured. I just sweeped 180 degrees. And when you plot that down onto the graph and compare it to all these other lights, you can see that the UT02 is the major thrower compared to all these other lights. The flutters sit down at the bottom. The C8 you can see is halfway up the page, and then the UT02 towers above that by double. And then if we add in the L6 and the Skyray King DQG, you can see they're trying to climb up there, but they can't reach the level of the UT02. So the UT02 is definitely the king of all throwers. On the sidewalk, it's pretty horrible. It's just this little dot. And that's not really the kind of light you need when you walk around on the sidewalk. For trail walking, it's not good either because it's just really good at throwing really far away, but sometimes in trails you want to see further away. Could be a dog or a bear up ahead, so to see it. And basically this thing is just for throwing far, far away. So if you're trying to see across this field, you can light up the buildings across the field no problem. You can sweep back and forth and basically see anything across that field. So you can see how that 3.5 degree beam lets you shoot way out towards that bridge. It has some field angle and peripheral angle up to 60 degrees, so you can still see to your left and right a little bit, but that dot in the middle is going to glare you and blind you if you try to see right in front of you. So it works as a trail light, but not well. I'd give it 2 out of 5 stars. Now there's a tower super far away, and it can light that up pretty well too. The tower's already lit up, so it's going to be hard to light up, but you can still tell that the UT02 is lighting it up. So this is probably the best thrower I own, and it's only about 1,000 lumen. It's because of that awesome reflector and its ability to throw light down a 3.5 degree beam. This thing has a lot of different modes, and I think they've done a pretty good job giving you different modes. You've got strobe, you've got beacon, SOS, and they're hidden away. You got to double click to get to them. Most of your major modes are medium, high, and turbo, and low. So as you can see, there's two main group modes. The one on the left, which has mode memory, and then the group mode on the right, which has your strobe SOS, beacon, battery check, and your infinite turbo, which bypasses the 2-minute turbo timer. So on the left side, you can access your mode memory by holding it on, long press, and then turning it off with a long press. Right now it's on turbo, but if you go to medium number 1, you can always get back to medium number 1. You go to medium 2, high, and turbo, you can always get back to turbo now. And with the short press, you can go to low anytime. And then you long press to turn it off. But that isn't memorized. Only your medium number 1 to turbo are memorized. So you can always get back to turbo, no problem, or get to moonlight, no problem. But if you go to moonlight, and then you click it once to go to medium number 1, that's going to get memorized, and now it's always going to go to medium number 1. If you go to turbo, and then let it go to the turbo timer, and then turn it off, it'll actually go back to turbo again. It doesn't memorize the lower mode from the turbo timer. Now let's go to battery check with a double click. It goes to this purple glowing light, which you can leave on, put it on your nightstand, and then you can easily have a locator light for your flashlight, so you can get to your flashlight pretty easily. But the next button is SOS, so that doesn't really make any sense. Then you go to beacon, that doesn't make any sense. It makes sense to leave it on battery check to use as your locating light, and then anytime you need the flashlight and it's in a dark room, you just click it once and it's already on turbo. You can access strobe from off or from your first group mode memory. So the user interface is pretty intuitive, and it gives you a lot of different options. It even has that battery check, which is pretty handy. If it's blue, the battery's full. If it's purple, it's between 3.3 and 3.7, and if it's red, it's less than 3.3 and your battery is about to die, you'll want to charge it up. When it's charging, it just stays red. So 3 hours and 40 minutes later, it is done charging. So since this is a boost driver, it's got inductors and capacitors in there, and that's how it keeps that flicker down low at 3%. So it's got a flicker index of 0.0. I give it a rating of A+ because it produces a very high quality light, and you can even use it to do high-speed videography. This is at 240 frames per second. And I just want to show you what a cheap eBay flashlight looks like. It has 100% flicker, and as you can see on the left side, there's all these bands. It's because it's really poor quality light. It turns itself off 100% every time it flickers, and it's doing that at 1217 Hertz. So it's not all about high pulse width modulation, it's about the percent flicker as well. So if you look at the left light, it's nice and smooth, solid. And you look at the right light, there's all these bands, and that's why you get that flickering. So any high quality light is going to produce smooth light when it dims. So all the cheaper flashlights that are like $6, they're actually not worth it because you're not going to be able to use that light at all. Now we're on to build quality and teardown, so let's take this thing apart. To take it apart, there's a nice stainless steel ring that holds in the button. Once you take out that stainless steel ring, you can push out the driver from the other side. And with that driver out, we can take everything else apart. So underneath that button, you'll see there's that positive wire. It has a solder blob right on it, and if you push hard on that using a screwdriver, this thing will pop out. But there's a bunch of small surface mounted resistors there, so be very careful. You break one of those resistors, this thing's toast. So let's press down on that positive terminal. But once you pop it, the circuit board will just come free. And here's some close-ups showing you the driver. It's a very high quality driver. It's well built, and you can see all these little holes that are passed through. That allows it to have lower resistance and keep its efficiency up. So they didn't cheap out and just make a couple pass-through holes. There's a whole bunch here. So the internal resistance of this is going to be reduced, and you're going to have a very efficient driver. The reflector is probably the best thing of this flashlight, and it's a very high quality reflector. It's very smooth, there's no imperfections, and this thing even has threads on the outside of that reflector, so you can screw it nice and tight against your LED. So you get that nice 3.5 degree focus. The rear threads are square cut, and the front threads are tapered. And look at them. They're super high quality. I took these nice close-ups of it to show you how good they are. Anodized and smooth. There was some grease on the O-rings when I first got it, so they've gone that extra mile too. So this flashlight is rated for IPX7, and the second digit is a liquid ingress protection, and a 7 indicates that it's good for immersion up to 1 meter. So let's put this thing underwater, turn it on, and then let's come back, take it apart, and see if any water's gotten into it. I can't test it down to great depths, but at least I can turn it on turbo by going double click and then going to turbo within that secondary group mode memory. leave it underwater for a long period of time, let it run dead on turbo, let it cool down, and if water doesn't get into it, that means it's water resistant. So let's double click to strobe, then click through. So now this is turbo. So we'll put this in there, come back in a little while and check it out. Alright, so it's been a while and the sun's gone down, so let's check this thing out. Alright, so I think it's pretty much dry and it's acting kind of weird, so it must have some water in it, killing it or something, I don't know. Let's open it up. Oh yeah. So that's just water, I think, that got in when I opened it up. I don't think the water was really in there. Oh, actually, the water is actually inside the battery compartment. So I guess it's not meant for submersion. I guess it may be good for rain, and that's about it. It seems like these O-rings and stuff just are not meant to keep the water out. I think you have to have O-rings that are actually crushed to keep the water out. Like these O-rings allow you to actually turn the cylinder still, so I think it's not actually sealing watertight. It's just good enough for rain. So no matter what these guys say about submersion to 2 meters and stuff, I would not really recommend trying it. And although these are great flashlights, they're not meant for underwater usage, obviously. So let's see what actually is inside the circuit board. We'll turn this stainless steel ring, and it's not aluminum like the other ones, so you don't have to worry too much about scratching it. It's a really nice stainless steel ring, and it's way better than the one on the Convoy C8, which is aluminum, and the Skyray King. You're paying a little extra for this flashlight, and you definitely get that extra quality. And the plastic button even has a piece of aluminum on the bottom. That is attention to detail right there. They could have just used a plastic button, but it would fail and crack and wouldn't be too durable. So there's some water in here, but it's hard to tell if the water actually got in or it was just sitting there when I opened it up. This Manker button here is actually glued right in there. So you've got to get something to kind of scratch away the glue and get that thing broken free. So let's press down on that wire only, that positive terminal, not break anything. Okay, so I definitely see water in there. I think that got in through this USB charge port. So its rating is definitely wrong, and I'd say at best this thing stands up against rain. So it's kind of expected that having a USB charge port makes another hole for it to have some water getting in, and the rubber stopper wasn't strong enough to keep that water out, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to give this a grade of an F, and I would say that it's more of an IPX4 rating. So it's good against splashing water and a little bit of rain, but that's about it. You can't really put this underwater for an extended period of time. The water will slowly seep in there and damage your electronics. So the light was actually flickering on and off because the water was on the driver. So to get the board out, we got to desolder the button and the LED. So we'll unscrew the top. And this is where you can see that they've really gone the extra mile. Look at that. Threads all along this thick aluminum reflector. This is where you pay the extra couple dollars. This reflector is better than any other reflector I've ever seen. The spacer on there is thinner, so they have it perfectly centered and down as deep as it can get. And these threads just help you screw that down nice and tight. And also, if you take a really close look, that LED board right there is perfectly fit to the outside edge. It's the exact same diameter almost as that. So I'm liking the build quality of this thing, and their attention to detail is insane because look, this thing screws in there, fits perfectly into that white spacer, and then you can crank that down nice and tight, and then what you do is this thing screws right on top of there. And there's an O-ring on the inside. Most builds have the O-ring on the outside, and what that does is create a little gap there. They've actually pushed that glass right up against that piece of metal and then put the ring on the inside. And there's a little recess inside this reflector that fits the O-ring, and it crushes down on the O-ring when you crank this down and creates a seal both on the sides and against that glass. So it keeps water and moisture from getting into the reflector by doing that. That's some insane machining and really, really tight tolerances in manufacturing. So they've got double O-rings to keep that water out of there, and there's a nice anti-reflective coating on the lens. And then here's the attention to detail once again. You tighten that up, and it's super tight, and it lines that uTorch logo right up with that button. So for them to get that fit and finish and manufactured to those specifications, that's some insane engineering and manufacturing. I don't know if they decided to do this on purpose, but when you unscrew the top, it pulls out the reflector automatically for you. That's probably just by accident, but it doesn't really matter. But it's pretty nice that that does it, because then you've got it all taken apart. You can see from that reflection that it's nice and purple, and that means it's got a nice anti-reflective coating on there. That means that the light won't bounce off it, it'll actually go through it, and then you'll have all the light out the front. It gives you more lumens, more efficiency out of this system. So you don't want to touch that and wipe it, because if you start wiping at it, you're going to scratch it and all that. These wires look like they're silicone. They're not being melted by my 850 degree Fahrenheit soldering iron, so that's good to see they've used quality parts. And yeah, these guys put in a lot of thermal paste, as you can see by this big mess. Holy smokes. Let's clean that up and see what we got here. So we'll do some close-ups of this sucker so you can get a good feel of what it's like. Here's what that thermal paste looks like. They slathered a lot on there. It's pretty much perfectly applied too. Some of it was seeping out, but not too much. And it looks like it was covering the entire surface. That's really good. So here's the MCPCB board. It's a pretty nice, thick, heavy piece of copper, and it is pretty heavy at 7.3 grams. Here's a 21 millimeter. It's only 4.1 grams. And here's a sink pad with some leads on it, 2.7 grams. And here's what aluminum would be like, 1.3 grams. So that is a hefty MCPCB board, and it's going to pull all that heat away from that LED. But the funny thing is, they're not running that at 100% of what it's rated for, because the boost driver can only do so much. They've only got like 10 watts going through it, and this thing can actually take 13 watts. Somehow, if you can get a better boost driver in there, you can run this a lot hotter, put out more lumens, and get that extra throw. You could probably go a kilometer if you could push more amps to that thing. But that's very hard to do out of a single lithium ion, because you're jumping from 4.2 volts all the way up to 12. So that's going to be difficult to do. A 21 millimeter star is already pretty big, and that's what the L6 uses in it. They're using this monster one. I don't even know what size that is. That thing's like 27.7 millimeters wide. That's huge. So that's already big, and it's 21. 24 gauge wires. Overall, the UT02 is a well-built flashlight. The LED is not screwed in, but that's fine because this thing will actually push it down even harder and help thin out that thermal paste and push it against the body. So that's probably better than having two screws. A lot of engineering and design went into this. These are nicely tapered threads, beefy and smooth, anodized, and everything fits together very well. The lens has an anti-reflective coating on both sides. Look at that reflector. It's basically perfectly made, and that's how they can get that 3-degree beam angle. 700 plus meters of throw. See how thin that bottom edge is? That allows them to get right up against the LED and have it focus perfectly. That's how you make a thrower, and if you don't know what you're doing, you won't be able to do that. And then they chose a very good LED and threw it on this massive 27.7 millimeter in diameter copper MCPCB board. And it keeps that XHP35 cool. And attention and detail also went into this little plastic spacer. It centers the reflector right onto that LED, and watch this. If you put that on there, it won't even come off. That's how perfectly sized it is. Like, there's almost no play there. This is insane quality. And the impressive quality and manufacturing carries on to the body. Look at this thing. That integrated base plate in the body is actually so thick that they machine that piece out and it still doesn't go right through it. So you can tell it's very thick. And that helps you transfer all the heat out into the body and away from that LED, helping it keep super bright and punch out a lot of light. These two small holes are threaded holes for you to secure your USB charging board. Look at all the machining that went into this thing. You can feel the quality of the machining because they've chamfered all these edges. It's not 90 degrees. It actually feels nice to the touch. It doesn't feel like it's trying to cut you or anything. A lot of lights that are under $100 have those 90 degree edges and they've just anodized it. They haven't really cleaned it up. This one feels smooth in your hand and doesn't have that sharp cutting edge that's 90 degrees. A lot of these retaining rings are made out of aluminum, and that's cheaper to do, but this is a nice stainless steel one. I think there's two color LEDs on this board on either side, and then there's 4 current limiting resistors for the LEDs, I think. It's a nice little silicone button, which goes with this plastic button, and even the back of this plastic button has aluminum so it doesn't fall apart, and that fits perfectly on there. You don't even know it's two different pieces. It's so flush. Two machine screws to hold in your USB charge port. Here's the boost driver, and I assume that the charging circuits and everything are on here. So this must be responsible for boosting up to 12 volts or more from your 4.2 volt cell. That's pretty amazing that this thing can take 2.4 amps and boost it up to over 12 volts. I'm not going to try modding this because boost circuits are pretty hard to increase in efficiency and output. It's probably designed to take 2.4 amps and that's it. So it's stuck at 10 watts and you probably can't push it much beyond that. So there are a couple things you can do is replace these LED leads with thicker ones. It comes with 24 gauge and you can throw on 20 gauge easily. You can also bypass the springs because spring material does not have good conductivity. It's got some resistance. Even though they're doubled up and gold plated, you can still reduce the resistance there, increase the efficiency of the system. So there's little things you can do, but not a whole lot. And then this body is super thick. This thing is about 4.6 millimeters thick. That is pretty thick for a 26650 light. You don't have to worry about this thing falling apart, and you'll feel that when you hold on to this flashlight. It's heavy. It's not a lightweight flashlight, but that's because it's built with thick reflector body, mid body, and the tail cap is pretty awesome too. Here's the tail cap, double gold plated springs. I've upgraded it by bypassing both of the springs with copper braid, and I'll show you how I did that in the modifications part of the video. The board on the bottom is just siliconed into the bottom, so once you take that out, just put some double-sided sticky tape on there, and then it won't fall out anymore. It would have been nice if they put a tripod mount on the back, but I guess you can't ask for everything for less than 60 bucks. You could probably drill that through yourself, thread it, and then silicone it, and that'll be fine. So let's put this light back together. So I'd say the overall build quality is pretty good. The fit and finish are exceptional, and I like those chamfered corners. And that reflector is insanely good. And its low battery protection is very good, and it starts to reduce the modes at 3.2 volts and then just shuts it off completely at 3.02 volts. So your battery is going to stay protected. You're not going to damage them in this flashlight. If you leave it on, don't worry about it. I'd prefer that it actually drains the batteries down to 2.5 volts, but for people who want to keep your batteries in good condition, that's not a good thing. You can easily stand this on the tail, light up an entire room with it, so if the power goes out, this is a very good light to have. It has a lanyard if you want to use it, and you can put that on there without affecting its tail stand too. So they've thought everything through, they know what they're doing with this flashlight. The only thing they didn't give me is a tripod mount. So again, that boost driver makes it very hard to upgrade, but you can replace it with a single cell FET driver and then replace the LED with an XPL2 or something. The good thing is that 27.7mm copper MCP board can accept XPL and XPL2 LEDs because it uses all the same Cree 3.5 by 3.5 LED standard. So you can easily desolder that XHP35 and replace it with the XPL2. You don't need anything special to desolder it. All you need to do is put a soldering iron along the back, heat up the board until that thing comes loose. You can just pick it off with tweezers really carefully, and then you can tin it with lead solder if you have some low melt lead solder. Put your new XPL right on top of it, throw in your single cell driver, and now you're ready to go. So you can probably push 20 watts to an XPL2 in this body easily and make it throw over a kilometer, no problem. So I think this flashlight makes a very good host for a thrower. And I've got 4 XPL2s waiting and ready to go to make a thrower from. So I'm probably going to put one of those inside the uTorch and see if I can make it throw like 1.4 kilometers. And with a good 26650, it could probably even push more than 20 watts. So let's see what this thing can do. So that'll be in a future video. Its thermal management is pretty good. If you put it to turbo on the first group mode, it has a 2-minute turbo timer. After that time, it slowly ramps it down to something that's between high and turbo. It goes to something that's like 60% of turbo. And then at 60% turbo, it stays at around 39 degrees Celsius. So it's a very safe light to give to people to use and has great thermal management with that turbo timer. Unfortunately, it doesn't ramp down due to high temperature. And I heated it up with a hairdryer and it didn't do much, so I know it's not paying attention to the temperature. So if I wanted 5 out of 5 on my thermal management rating, it would have to have active temperature monitoring and active ramping down. But none of the lights I have really seem to do that. So if you want to make it stay on turbo indefinitely, then go into the strobe mode and then click the button like I showed you before. But be careful when you do that because the flashlight actually gets up to 58 degrees Celsius. And that's enough to burn you. Anything that's over 47 degrees is enough to burn you because it's cooking you, because it denatures your protein. It didn't come with a battery, but I have this 26650 little Cala. I tested it out and it actually produces 5000 milliamp hours, and its internal resistance is as low as a Sony VTC5. So it's a very high quality battery at a very low price. So I recommend this. I got this one from GearBest. I'll put some links in the description to the one I ordered. And it's pretty awesome that they put in the adapter so you can use an 18650. A lot of manufacturers don't do that. And it only pulls 2.4 amps, so that's less than an S2 Plus, which means you can use pretty cheap batteries. You don't need a high drain battery like a Sony VTC. This thing is hefty at 397 grams. It's almost as heavy as the Skyray King, which is a 4 18650 light with 7 XML2 LEDs in there. So this is not a lightweight light. Like, look at the C8. It's kind of a similar size, similar thrower, but it comes in at half the weight. So if you want to carry around a lightweight light, go for the Convoy S2 or the C8. This is almost up there with the Skyray King and L6. And that's because the construction is so good and all that aluminum is super thick. And it uses that large 26650 battery. So this is not a cheap light, but at 50 bucks, it's great value for your dollar and worth every penny. Because you're getting the best thrower possible. And its build quality is very good. And it makes for a good host to make a super thrower if you really want to do that. The only problem is that USB charge port, which lets in water. That's not a big deal because everything else is awesome about the flashlight. So unless you expect to be hiking and going in the rain with this, it'll be fine. So I'd say the intended purpose for this is just throwing, lighting up super far away. So anyone who wants to mount this and use it as a throwing light to spot super far away, this is definitely the light to go with. It's also a good gift for anyone needing a flashlight because it has that integrated charge port. So you can give someone this flashlight, 126/650 battery, and then they're good to go. Everyone has USB chargers, so anyone can use this without buying a separate charger for it. So anyone who wants to buy a flashlight with a charge port and not have a whole bunch of batteries and chargers, this is the light to go with. It gives you a very powerful light and can be used as a utility light if you reduce the output. The USB charger is actually very fast. It's double what the F1 can pull. So if you need power quickly, it can give you that. So I'd be careful if you plan on going hiking with this thing and you get stuck in the rain, because you don't want water getting in there and making your flashlight die on you. So for that, get something like the Zanflare F1, Convoy L6, S2 Plus, or the C8. So in conclusion, this is an awesome light, and I'd definitely get it if you want a good thrower with a USB charge port. It's only 50 bucks, and on sale it can even go down less than that. So it's awesome bang for your buck. It actually comes in a pretty nice cardboard box or retail package, so you can wrap that up and give it away as a good gift to somebody that doesn't have a lithium-ion charger. So I hope you enjoyed that video and I covered everything you want to learn about this flashlight. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching, and I hope that helps. Thanks to all my subscribers. Stay tuned for more, and I'll post some upgrade videos and some more flashlight review videos up here when they come down the pipeline. That's it for now.